The stone wall had stood there since 1824. 200 years of weather, war, progress, and change had not moved it an inch. My great-great-grandfather, Thomas Harmon, had built it with his own hands when this part of the county was nothing but wilderness and possibility. Each stone was selected with purpose, fitted without mortar, a testament to craftsmanship that modern builders could only dream of replicating. I remember tracing the rough texture with my small fingers as a child, my father standing beside me, explaining how this wall was not just a boundary, but a history book written in granite. "Every scratch tells a story," he would say, his weathered hand resting on top of my head. "This mark here, that is from the Civil War when soldiers marched through our property, and this curve here follows the natural spring that has watered our family for generations." After my father passed away, I did something I never thought I would do. I moved back to my childhood home. The corporate job in the city, the apartment with a view, the fast-paced life, none of it mattered when compared to the weight of preserving what my ancestors had built. The old farmhouse needed work, but its bones were as solid as the day it was raised. And surrounding it all, defining it all, was that magnificent stone wall. I did not realize how much the neighborhood had changed until I attended what they called a welcome meeting by the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. When my father was alive, our property had been grandfathered in, exempt from their rules due to its historical status. I assumed the same courtesy would extend to me. The meeting took place in their newly built community center. Men and women in pressed khakis and polo shirts greeted me with practiced smiles. Sharon Thompson, the HOA president, a woman with perfectly highlighted hair and an artificial warmth, seemed particularly interested in my transition to the community. "We are so delighted to have fresh blood in the neighborhood," she said, handing me a thick binder. "This contains all our community guidelines. Oak Ridge Estates prides itself on consistent visual harmony." I accepted the binder politely. "Thank you. The property has been in my family for generations. I am just continuing the tradition." Sharon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, your family home does have character. There are some non-conforming property features we will need to discuss at some point. Nothing urgent." I did not think much of it at the time. I was still grieving, still adjusting, still finding my place in the home where every room echoed with memories. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead, bold red text across the top. "Violation notice, immediate action required." I scanned the text, my confusion quickly turning to disbelief. According to the notice, my unauthorized perimeter structure was in violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards and needed to be removed within 30 days or daily fines would begin accruing. They were talking about the wall that had been standing for 2 centuries, the wall that predated their community by generations, the wall that marked not just property but heritage. I read the letter 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. But there it was, in clinical language that belied the violence of its demand. Remove non-conforming boundary structure. My hands began to shake, not from fear but from something deeper, more primal. This was not just stone they were threatening. It was my history, my identity. I set the letter down and walked outside. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the oak trees, illuminating sections of the wall in patches of golden light. I placed my palm against a particularly large stone near the cornerstone my great-great-grandfather had laid first, according to family legend. "I will not let them touch you," I whispered to the silent stone. "Not one piece." I did not yet know how I would fight this battle. I did not yet understand the forces I was up against. But in that moment, with my hand against the cool stone my ancestors had placed, I made a vow that would change everything. This wall would outlast us all, just as it was meant to. That night I cracked open the HOA manual, a 3-ring binder thick enough to serve as a weapon. Page after page of regulations, each more ridiculous than the last. Roof shingle colors, acceptable mailbox designs, permissible holiday decoration periods, and buried in Section 12, Subsection D, Paragraph 7, all property boundaries must maintain aesthetic consistency with community standards. No wall, fence, hedge, or boundary marker shall exceed neighborhood visual harmony guidelines as determined by the board. Vague, subjective, designed to give them absolute control. I drafted my response immediately, my fingers hammering against my laptop keyboard with growing intensity. I detailed the historical significance of the wall, its age, its craftsmanship, its status as a pre-existing structure that predated their development by nearly 2 centuries. I included photographs, family stories, even a passage from a county historical survey that mentioned it as a landmark. 3 days later, their response arrived. Not just a letter this time, but a formal warning notice. The language had escalated from removal requested to compliance mandated. The daily fines had doubled. There was mention of legal action, of the HOA's right to remedy violations at the homeowner's expense. They had not addressed a single point I had made about the wall's historical significance. I contacted the County Historical Society the same day. Martha Winters, the elderly director, sounded genuinely interested in helping preserve the wall. She arranged to visit the property the following week to begin the landmark designation process. But when Martha arrived, she brought unexpected news. "Someone from your HOA board called our trustees yesterday," she explained, her voice heavy with apology. "They cited a neighborhood covenant that apparently gives them veto power over any historical designations within the development boundaries. Our hands are tied unless we can prove the structure has significant county-wide importance." I felt the blood drain from my face. "They blocked it before you even saw it." Martha nodded grimly. "I have never seen anything like it. Someone went to great lengths to prevent this wall from being protected." Word of my battle spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors stopped by to offer quiet support, quick visits, hushed voices, furtive glances over shoulders. Others avoided eye contact when I passed their manicured lawns. A few sent anonymous notes suggesting I just comply to keep property values stable. One evening, as dusk settled over the property, a luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. Sharon Thompson emerged, her smile as practiced as ever, though now tinged with something harder around the edges. "I thought we might discuss your situation in person," she said, not waiting for an invitation before walking toward the wall. "You know, there is a simple solution here." I followed her, arms crossed. "Is there?" She gestured vaguely toward my property. "The wall is beautiful, historically speaking. No one disputes that. But it extends almost 3 feet beyond what our surveys show as your property line. If you would just agree to move it back onto your side, we could categorize it as a decorative feature rather than a boundary marker." I stared at her, disbelief mounting. "This wall has stood in this exact spot for 200 years. Your development was built around it. How could it possibly be encroaching?" Sharon's smile did not reach her eyes. "Our surveys are very clear. The HOA owns a 6-foot easement along all roadways. Your wall is in our space." That night after Sharon left, I pulled out the old family records my father had preserved in the attic. Property deeds, tax assessments, original land grants. If they wanted to fight me on boundaries, then I needed to understand exactly what I owned. I spread the papers across the dining room table, some so old they threatened to crumble at my touch. Land parcels that once encompassed hundreds of acres. Subdivisions my grandfather had made in the 1960s. Easements granted to the county for road development. I was not a surveyor or a legal expert, but something about Sharon's confident claims did not add up. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, comparing modern property maps with historical documents. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, a realization began to form, a possibility so unexpected that I almost could not believe it myself. This was not just about a wall anymore. This was about who really owned the ground beneath our feet. The county records office smelled of dust and forgotten paper. I had taken a day off work to dive deeper into my suspicions, armed with the documents I had found at home, and a growing sense that something was not right about the HOA's claims. Margaret, the county clerk who had been there since before I was born, greeted me with genuine warmth. Harmon, I have not seen one of you folks in ages. How is the old homestead?" "Under siege," I replied, explaining my situation. Her face clouded. Those developer types have been throwing their weight around for years. Let me see what we have on file for your family plot. Hours passed as we dug through records, digital files, microfiche, ancient deed books with handwritten entries. The story that emerged was not what I expected. In 1968, when developers first approached my grandfather about selling portions of our land for what would become Oak Ridge Estates, he had been strategic in ways I never understood until now. Yes, he had sold them acreage, but not all of it, not even close. "Look at this," Margaret said, pointing to a subdivision application. "Your grandfather split the remaining land into 17 separate parcels for tax purposes, but he never surrendered the rights. According to these records, your family still legally owns 5 undeveloped lots within the current HOA boundaries." I leaned closer. "What does that mean exactly?" Margaret adjusted her glasses. "It means they built their precious development partially on land they do not fully control. These parcels here," she circled several areas on the map, "include parts of what they now call community green spaces and 3 sections of roadway." I left the records office with photocopies of everything and immediately called James Thornton, a property lawyer recommended by Margaret. He agreed to see me that afternoon. His assessment was blunt and startling. "Based on these documents, you are not just a homeowner in their association. You are a major landholder," he explained, spreading the maps across his desk. "Your grandfather was clever. He maintained ownership of strategic parcels throughout what is now their development, which gives you extraordinary voting rights most homeowners do not have." "How is that possible? Would not the HOA have known this?" James smiled thinly. "Developers cut corners, records get lost, and your grandfather's approach was unusual, parceling land while maintaining unified ownership. What matters is that legally you control approximately 22% of the land they consider theirs." "And that means what exactly?" "It means you technically outrank the entire board in voting power when it comes to land use decisions. Their own bylaws state that voting weight is partially determined by land ownership percentage. You have been operating as if you are subject to their authority, when in fact, you hold substantial power over them." I sat back, mind reeling. Why would they push me about the wall then? Surely they would have checked all this. James shook his head. "My guess, they have no idea. The current board probably inherited records from previous administrations without verifying. They see an old house, an old wall, and assume they have authority." As I drove home, the implications settled over me like a heavy mantle. This was not just about preserving my wall anymore. This was about correcting a fundamental misunderstanding of power. That evening, another notice arrived from the HOA. A formal order to remove the wall within 30 days or face legal consequences, including forced removal. I placed the notice on my kitchen table, no longer afraid. I would not announce what I had discovered, not yet. Strategic timing would be essential. They had given me 30 days to tear down my wall. I would give myself 30 days to dismantle their illusion of control. For the first time since this battle began, I slept soundly that night. The rhythmic sound of gentle rain against the ancient stones of the wall, a reminder that some things were built to endure. The rumble of diesel engines woke me at exactly 7:00 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I looked out my bedroom window to see 2 excavators, a dump truck, and a crew of workers in high-visibility vests gathered at the edge of my property. Standing apart from them, directing the operation with animated hand gestures, was Sharon Thompson. I dressed quickly and calmly. This was the moment they had chosen to force my hand. 30 days had not yet passed, but they were betting on intimidation to win the day. They did not expect what I carried as I walked outside. Not rage or helpless protests, but a leather portfolio containing very specific legal documents. The workers paused as I approached. One removed his hard hat respectfully. Sharon stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Good morning," she said briskly. "As per our previous notices, we are proceeding with the removal of the non-conforming structure. If you would like to witness the process, you may do so from your porch, but please do not interfere with the crew." I smiled. Not the angry grimace she expected, but a calm, knowing smile that visibly unsettled her. "Actually, I have something for your crew foreman," I said, opening the portfolio. The foreman, a burly man with decades of construction experience etched into his face, stepped forward cautiously. "This is a cease and desist order," I explained, handing him the document. "It prohibits any alteration, damage, or removal of structures on this property, which includes the perimeter wall. It is signed by Judge Hamilton of the County Circuit Court and is legally binding." The foreman examined the document carefully, then looked at Sharon. "Mom, we cannot proceed with this. This is a legal order." Sharon snatched the paper from him. "This is absurd. You cannot possibly have obtained this. Our legal team." "Your legal team was not aware of the property ownership discrepancies that have recently come to light," I interrupted. "If you direct these workers to continue, you will be personally liable for damages and in contempt of court." The workers looked between us, uncomfortable witnesses to a power struggle they had not signed up for. After a tense silence, the foreman made the decision for everyone. "We are packing up," he announced. "Call us back when this legal matter is resolved." Sharon remained after the equipment rumbled away, her composure cracking. "This is not over, not even close." "You are right about that," I replied. "In fact, it is just beginning." That weekend, I decided to change tactics. Fighting in the shadows had protected the wall temporarily, but true victory would require community support. I printed flyers inviting neighbors to a wall of history gathering at my property, a celebration of local heritage featuring refreshments, historical displays, and stories of the area before it became Oak Ridge Estates. I was prepared for a small turnout. What I got was nearly half the neighborhood. Families with children, elderly couples, young professionals. They came curious, perhaps even skeptical, but they came. I had set up a display table with historical photographs, original land grants, and newspaper clippings showing the wall throughout different eras. A local historian I had invited spoke about settlement patterns in the county. Children were invited to make crayon rubbings of the stone's unique textures. What I had not expected was media interest. A reporter from the county newspaper arrived, then a blogger who specialized in local history. By mid-afternoon, our gathering had become a news story. "This wall represents continuity in a world obsessed with replacement," I told the reporter as she photographed children playing near the structure. "It reminds us that some things are meant to last, to connect generations." As neighbors mingled, I overheard conversations shifting from polite interest to genuine concern about the HOA's actions. People who had lived under restrictive rules for years were suddenly questioning authority they had previously accepted without thought. By evening, as the last guests departed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had subtly shifted. The wall was no longer just my problem. It had become a symbol. I had transformed from an eccentric holdout to a defender of something people had not realized they valued. That night, I filed formal paperwork to rezone a portion of my legally owned parcels. The board would soon discover that the ground they thought was theirs had never truly been under their control. The first sign that the HOA was losing its grip came 3 days after the community gathering. Susan Miller, who had lived 4 houses down for 15 years, approached me while I was checking my mail. "That was a lovely event you hosted," she said, glancing around to ensure no one was watching our interaction. "Listen, not everyone on the board agrees with how Sharon is handling this situation. Some of us think this has gone too far." Susan, as it turned out, was not just a resident but a board member, one who had been outvoted repeatedly when it came to my property. Over the next week, 3 more board members made similar clandestine visits. Each shared stories that painted a disturbing picture of how the HOA had operated for years. Selective enforcement of rules against residents who questioned authority. Misallocation of maintenance funds toward projects that benefited properties owned by board members. Internal documents that were altered or hidden from general members. Arnold Jenkins, the treasurer, brought copies of financial records showing unexplained transfers between accounts. "They will claim I stole these," he said nervously. But people have a right to know where their dues are going. The wall is just the latest distraction from bigger problems. I began recording these conversations with permission. I collected copies of every document they provided. A pattern emerged of systematic intimidation and financial irregularities stretching back years. My wall had not created this situation. It had simply brought long-simmering tensions to the surface. With this growing evidence, I contacted my lawyer again. Can we use these testimonies as leverage? Better than leverage, James replied. This is grounds for a full community vote to restructure or possibly dissolve HOA authority over certain parcels. With your land ownership percentage and growing support, we have a real chance of success. I filed motions to extract my legally owned parcels from HOA control, including the land where the wall stood. The paperwork landed like a bomb at the next board meeting. Their response was swift and vicious. A community-wide email blast portrayed me as a selfish agitator, threatening property values and neighborhood stability. Signs appeared overnight proclaiming, "Protect our community" and "Unity over division," ironic messaging from a group that had begun to fracture from within. Sharon led the counterattack personally, claiming I had falsified historical records and manipulated vulnerable board members. At the local coffee shop, I overheard her telling a group of concerned residents that I planned to sell my reclaimed parcels to commercial developers. My lawyer responded with a carefully worded letter addressing each false claim and hinting at possible defamation charges if the misinformation continued. We also requested a formal audit of HOA finances by an independent accountant. The atmosphere in the neighborhood grew tense. Some neighbors crossed the street to avoid speaking with me. Others began to openly question the board's narrative. Small groups gathered in living rooms and on back decks, discussing concerns that had been silenced for years. One evening, a brick came through my front window with a note attached, "Drop it or else." I photographed everything before calling the police. When the responding officer arrived, he seemed unsurprised. "We have been getting calls about HOA disputes in this neighborhood for years," he explained while taking my statement. "Though this is the first time it has escalated to property damage." I installed security cameras the next day, not out of fear, but to ensure that whatever happened next would be documented. The wall stood silent through it all, unmoved by human drama as it had been for centuries. That night, I sat on my back porch, watching fireflies rise above the ancient stones. The wall had become more than just a family legacy now. It had become a catalyst for truth in a community built on carefully maintained illusions. People were awakening to the reality that the rules they had lived under were neither inevitable nor unchallenged. In fighting for my wall, I had inadvertently started dismantling theirs. And with each new revelation, each new supporter who found the courage to speak up, the foundation of their authority crumbled a little more. The community center auditorium had never been so full. Folding chairs were arranged in tight rows, with people standing against the walls when seating ran out. The emergency community meeting I had called, legally within my rights as a major landholder, had drawn nearly every resident of Oak Ridge Estates. Sharon and her remaining loyal board members sat in the front row, a united front of pressed clothing and clenched jaws. My supporters were scattered throughout the crowd, identifiable by their subtle nods of encouragement as I approached the podium. My lawyer stood nearby, clipboard in hand, ready to ensure all procedures followed the bylaws precisely. We had anticipated every possible objection, every procedural maneuver that might derail the vote. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know many of you have questions about why we are here. Some have heard I am trying to destroy the HOA. Others have heard I am fighting for historical preservation. The truth is both simpler and more complex." I explained, step by step, the discovery of my family's continued ownership of key parcels throughout the development. I outlined the evidence of financial discrepancies and selective rule enforcement. I shared, without names, the testimonies of board members who had come forward. "This is not about a wall," I continued. This is about whether we want to live in a community governed by fear and favoritism, or one based on transparency and genuine representation. Sharon stood before I had finished. This meeting is unauthorized. The board did not approve this gathering or its agenda. My lawyer stepped forward, documents in hand. According to Section 5, Paragraph 3 of your own bylaws, any landowner controlling more than 20% of community property may call for a special vote with 14 days' notice, which was provided. This meeting is not only authorized, it is binding. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many were hearing about my land ownership status for the first time. Sharon tried again. These ownership claims are fabricated and under legal review. The county recorder has verified all documentation, my lawyer countered calmly. Copies are available for anyone who wishes to examine them. For 3 hours, residents spoke. Some defended the board, citing property value increases and community standards. But many more, shared stories of intimidation, of arbitrary rule changes, of feeling powerless in their own homes. Marta Gonzalez, who had lived in Oak Ridge for 20 years, approached the microphone with visible nervousness. They fined me $2,000 for planting native wildflowers instead of approved bushes. My husband was fighting cancer. We could not afford it. We paid with his medication money. John Templeton, a retired attorney, spoke about requesting financial records for years and being stonewalled at every turn. In a properly functioning HOA, transparency is not optional. It is mandatory. When all testimonies concluded, I presented the motion. A restructuring of HOA authority to remove their control over my historically owned parcels, a full external audit of all financial records, and new board elections within 30 days. Sharon made her final stand as voting began. This man wants special treatment. He wants to destroy everything we have built. If his wall stays, next it will be broken down cars and trash piles. Property values will plummet. An elderly woman in the back row stood up. I remember when this land was all Harmon property. My father worked for his grandfather. That wall has been there longer than any of us. Maybe we should be asking why you are so determined to tear it down. The vote was conducted by secret ballot to protect residents from retaliation. My lawyer and 3 volunteer residents counted while the room waited in tense silence. When the results were announced, 79% in favor of the motion, the room erupted. Some cheered, others sat in stunned silence. Sharon stared at the voting tally as if it were written in an incomprehensible language. Without a word, she removed the president's gavel from her purse, placed it on the table, and walked out. 2 board members followed. The others remained, looking both relieved and uncertain about what would come next. I had not just saved my wall. I had helped free an entire community from years of quiet oppression disguised as order. As people surrounded me with congratulations and questions about next steps, I glanced out the window toward my property, where the ancient stones stood in the gathering dusk, silent witnesses to yet another chapter of human history. The first frost of autumn dusted the stones with white as I walked the perimeter of my property. 6 months had passed since the vote that changed everything. The wall, object of so much conflict, stood unchanged, unmoved, unconcerned with the human drama it had catalyzed. I ran my fingers along a particularly weathered section, feeling the subtle grooves where my ancestors' tools had shaped raw stone into legacy. A bronze plaque now marked the cornerstone, installed during a community celebration the previous month. Its text was simple but meaningful. Harmon Family Boundary Wall, constructed 1824, a testament to craftsmanship, perseverance, and the enduring value of heritage in our community. The transformation of Oak Ridge Estates had been neither immediate nor painless. The audit revealed financial mismanagement more extensive than anyone had imagined. Community funds earmarked for infrastructure maintenance had been diverted to personal projects. Reserve accounts had been depleted. Selective enforcement had indeed been policy, not accident. The new board, elected in a record turnout vote, comprised a diverse group of long-time and newer residents, united by a commitment to transparency. HOA dues had actually decreased once wasteful spending was eliminated. New bylaws protected historical features throughout the neighborhood. Most significantly, the adversarial atmosphere had dissipated. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact now stopped to chat. Community workdays replaced compliance inspections. Children played freely on lawns without parents nervously checking the rulebook. Melissa Chen, a young mother who had moved in just before the conflict erupted, approached as I continued my morning walk along the wall. "I bring my son here sometimes," she confessed, falling into step beside me. "I tell him stories about how this wall was built before trains or cars or electricity. He thinks it is magic that something can last so long." I smiled. My father did the same with me. "The neighborhood feels different now," she continued. "When we first moved in, everyone seemed afraid. Now people plant gardens and paint their doors colors that make them happy. My husband says it is because of you." I shook my head. Not me, the wall. It reminded everyone that some things matter more than uniformity. Sharon Thompson had sold her house and moved away shortly after the vote. I heard she had joined a newly developed community with even stricter HOA regulations. Arnold Jenkins, the former treasurer who had helped expose the financial irregularities, now led community history walks that always included a stop at the wall. In autumn sunlight, I continued my circuit of the property, appreciating how the wall changed character with the shifting light, gray in shadow, golden where sun touched stone. Near the eastern corner, a young family had gathered, the father lifting his small daughter to place a tiny hand against the ancient granite. This was the true victory, not legal declarations or governance restructuring, but the reclamation of connection. The wall was no longer just my family's legacy. It had become a community anchor, a physical reminder that history deserves respect and preservation. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching fireflies rise above the wall just as they had for generations. My father would have appreciated the irony, that the structure he had taught me to maintain had ended up maintaining our community in return. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The work of building better governance never truly ended. But tonight, in the gathering darkness, I could feel the presence of those who had come before me, those who had placed stone upon stone with the hope that what they built would endure. And endure it had, through wars and depressions, through development and disputes, through one man's determination to honor what his ancestors had created. I walked to the wall one last time before heading inside. In the deepening twilight, I placed my palm against the cornerstone, feeling the cool roughness against my skin. "Thank you," I whispered to the silent stone. The wall offered no response. It did not need to. Its message had been the same for 2 centuries. Some things, when built with care and principle, outlast even those who would tear them down. I turned toward my home, the lights warm in gathering darkness. Behind me, the wall stood as it always had and always would. A boundary, a legacy, a reminder that what we choose to preserve defines not just our landscape but ourselves.